took actually a 20-pound note and I showed him and told him that, you know, what I thought about that. And he looked at me and kind of dismissed me and ignored me and thought I was crazy. But, you know, a few years later, the whole banking system almost collapsed in '08. And I think now the next collapse will be the currency. And the banks will go along with it for the ride, of course. Saturday, May 3rd, 2025, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Well, today we're going to look at Japan. Japan has fired a warning shot across the bow of the United States Treasury market. Yes, and Japan is also kind of aligning itself a little closer to China, which is really unusual, and we're going to look at that too. But before we go deeper into that, just want to give you a little story that I've spoken about before in the channel. But of course, we're getting more and more new subscribers, and I'd like to thank you for subscribing, and also thank all the existing subscribers for the interest in the channel. So the story is that one day when I was working in the city of London as a futures and options broker, and it was probably around 2004, I went to get some lunch and bring it back to my desk. That's what we usually did, unless I was on a business trip and I took clients out for lunch. I didn't really have many clients in London. They were more abroad. But anyway, I left the shop with my lunch to take it back to the office to eat at the desk, because we had to keep an eye on the markets the whole time. And clients could be calling to do business. I got some change, of course. I think I tendered a 20-pound note, and I got a 10-pound note and some coins. I guess nowadays you tender a 20-pound note for a sandwich and crisps and a drink, and you get a few coins back. But that's a different story. But that day was like my Eureka moment, really about the nature of our monetary or money system. I realized that it was based on a foundation of sand, really. And it was just a simple thing, really, a simple thought. And what was the thought? Well, when I was putting the 10-pound note back into my wallet, and back then they were bigger, I saw the writing here below Bank of England, and I read it for some reason. Usually you take a banknote, you don't really care, or nowadays you don't use banknotes anymore, you use cards and stuff. So here I was walking back to the office, and I stopped to read this, and it says, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of 10 pounds. And I thought to myself, there's something wrong here, because this is a vestige of when actually this was just a promissory note. Because if you look further here, there's the signature of the chief cashier. So it's the chief cashier that's promising you that if you tender that note, they will pay you 10 pounds. The question is, 10 pounds of what? Well, I guess you can go back hundreds of years. It used to be a pound of silver. But up until 1914, it used to be a sovereign, which was legally a pound. And believe it or not, you can check this online, a gold sovereign is still legally a pound. So we actually have a dual monetary system that most people don't know about. But anyway, what this meant, that you could take this note to the bank or to the Bank of England, to your bank or Bank of England, and say, I want my money, I want my pounds. Because this is not money, this isn't just a promise, it's a piece of paper and they'd give you 10 of these. But that all, of course, ended in 1914. I think the highest denomination back then was £5 anyway. But when I got back to the office, I actually looked for the Bank of England press office number, and I called and I asked to speak to someone about this. And someone, was on the other side of the line and talked to me about it. And I told the person that, yes, there's that promise there. And I said, what do you pay in? And he said, oh, no, that's just to, so that if your old banknote is damaged, you can bring it to the Bank of England and we'll give you a new one. Well, and then I said to him, so why don't you write that? You can get a new one if this one is damaged. And he couldn't answer back. And I said, well, the thing is, you used to pay in gold, so why do you keep this? And he couldn't answer again. So that's how I realized that there's something wrong with our system, and that it would eventually implode. And that's what's happening. Yes, it's been like 20 years since that happened, but I think it's accelerating now. And it's one of the reasons why I'm still trying to stack as much as possible of this and also silver, because if you look at how the system used to be, it was all based on gold and silver. And this is just this system or this is an imposter. It's not real money, and it's going to end in tears. And I'm going to recommend this book, What Has Government Done to Our Money by Murray Rothbard. I'll put a link below in the description where you can buy it, and I'll put a free PDF link as well where you can read it for free. And then another thing that happened a few months later was that I went to a Libertarian Alliance conference. It was kind of a libertarian party in the UK, and it was in the center of London, in the Mall, very fancy place. And actually Boris Johnson made a speech there. But what happened there was that there was an economist there, famous economist, Samuel Britton, who's passed away. And at the end of the conference, people were milling around, chatting to each other. And I walked up to him, and I took actually a £20 note, and I showed him and told him that, what I thought about that. And he looked at me and kind of dismissed me and ignored me and thought I was crazy. But, a few years later, the whole banking system almost collapsed in '08. And I think now the next collapse will be the currency. And the banks will go along with it for the ride, of course, because they just keep creating this out of thin air, because it's not real. It's an empty promise. And with that, we're going to go to Japan, because Japan holds a lot of empty promises from the United States, i.e. U.S. treasuries. And we all know that Japan has been a very faithful ally after getting nuked a couple of times back in 1945. But it looks like they're flexing their muscles a little bit, or maybe not. This came out yesterday on Reuters. It came out on other news outlets as well, but it says Japan's U.S. Treasury holdings among tools for trade talks, Finance Minister Kato says. I'll read this because it's not a long article. Japan's huge U.S. Treasury holdings are among tools available for Tokyo in trade negotiations with the United States. Japanese Finance Minister Katsunobu Kato said on Friday. Kato said the primary purpose of Japan's huge U.S. Treasury holdings is to ensure it has sufficient liquidity to conduct yen intervention when necessary. That's very economical with the truth. I would also argue that the reason they have so many treasuries is because they run a big surplus, plus they want to keep their currency weak as possible. So what do? They print yen and they buy dollars. He goes on to say, but we obviously need to put all cards on the table in negotiations. It could be among such cards. Kato said in a television program when asked whether Japan, in trade talks with the US, could reassure Washington it will not sell its Treasury holdings in the market. And this is what he added. Whether we actually use that card, however, is a different question. Reuters goes on to say Japan holds roughly 1.27 trillion in foreign reserves. While the government does not disclose the composition, analysts estimate that most of it is composed of U.S. Treasury debt. The other thing that I think is very interesting is that the current trade war or tariff war, whatever you want to call it, negotiations, is actually aligning countries that are usually not really closely aligned or allied to each other. Case in point, Japan and China. Hopefully you all know the history of these two nations, especially in the last 120 years. It hasn't been a great history. There's a lot of animosity between the two countries, but maybe they're leaving that to the past now, who knows? But Bloomberg reported back on April 24th, Japan to resist Trump efforts to form trade bloc against China. And I think that's very significant because it says here in the third paragraph, at the same time, the official said Japan doesn't want to get caught up in any U.S. effort to maximize trade pressure on China by curbing its own economic interaction with Beijing, which is Tokyo's biggest trading partner and an important source of goods and raw materials. This comment by Besant a few weeks ago that countries need to isolate China, I think it could backfire on the United States. And talking about treasuries and the fact that Japan is considering using it as a tool to negotiate, and having spoken about the fraudulent nature of our monetary system, and this is not just here in the UK. Just look at the Federal Reserve note. It promises nothing. It just says it's lawful money, it's legal tender for public and private debts, but it doesn't say anymore anything about paying in gold or silver, which the silver certificates and gold certificates used to say. The euro banknote, for example, only puts the number down. It doesn't even say anything about debt, or it's just a number. It's like a voucher, which is, if people don't realize how, fraudulent that is, I can't really help them, but maybe I'm strange. Maybe that's why I've been doing this for so long, because I had my Eureka moment. But talking about these empty promises, I want to look at some charts here of the Treasury market. And the one that I'm going to start with is a long-term chart going back to the early 70s. And you can see that the 10-year yield, which is the benchmark bellwether indicator for the financial system, not just in the United States, but worldwide, topped almost at 16% back in September of 1981. I think it was around 15.6. And yes, until 2020, as you can see, that trend was down, which is a good thing. Lower yields mean higher bond prices. It means borrowers can roll over their debt and pay less so they can borrow more. And the more borrowers borrow, the more they can buy, the more prices of financial assets go up. Everyone's happy, right? The creditor's happy because their asset is going up in value. The borrower is happy because their liabilities are going down. And if they have also an asset linked to their debt, that asset is going up in value, stocks, real estate. But things don't last forever, right? Good things don't last forever. And I think this bull market is over. And I think this chart is telling us that, because you can see we've broken all of these trend lines. And this was back in 2022. And there's still a lot of people out there, the perma bond bulls, who think in the next recession we're going to go back towards zero again. But I think the only way that is possible is for the central bank, i.e. the Fed, and also other central banks, they'll go along to print, well, at least 10 trillion just to get the printing presses going like we've never seen before. And yes, then they can buy all the government debt they want and drive these yields down. But the consequence of that would be basically the annihilation of the paper dollar, the paper pound, the euro, vis-a-vis gold. And that's what gold is all about. Gold is just a reflection of the worthlessness of the monetary system. And that's why I'm still holding on to it and trying to add on, even though it's becoming more and more difficult because our currencies are buying a lot less, not just everyday goods, but also real money. If they don't respond, then we could see yields go a lot higher, and that would also bring the whole system down. So they're between a rock and a hard place. And that's why I tell people a lot of times, yes, watch the news and see what's going on, but don't let it distract you from the biggest threat to your financial health, to your family's future. And that is our current, the current state of our monetary system. And just like 2008 proved me right about my Eureka moment, when all banks really were going to collapse. The whole system was going to collapse unless the only way that didn't happen was because there was intervention. And at that time, the debt burden wasn't as big. The Fed's balance sheet was below $1 trillion, so they could do it. But this time around, when the next crisis erupts, yes, they will try it again. But what will happen is the whole currency system will implode, and there will be no way to save that. There was a way to save the banks, but there's no way to save this. And that's why I'm holding on to gold and silver. And that's why I think you should as well, even though this is not advice, it's just my opinion. If you're interested, of course, I have some affiliates. Details are below in the description. I have a US affiliate and a UK affiliate. The second chart is more short term. It's only going back to 2018. But you can see here that we're hearing from Besant and Trump, oh yes, yields are coming down, mortgage rates are coming down, but I'm not too sure about it. The key level here is really 433. That was the high back in 2022. That was really important, and we're still hovering around this level. And we tested the trend line this week, but it rebounded quite sharply off that. And I think unless there's intervention by the Fed, unless there's yield curve control, more QE, we could see Secretary Besant's worst nightmare come true before the year ends, and that is 5% yield on the 10-year. And how do I know it's his worst nightmare? Well, because he told the world that in an interview a month or so ago, that he follows this like very closely, and it's the most important indicator. And he told us as well that 5% is like the line in the sand. So that's where we are, and turbulent times ahead. We haven't experienced currency collapse in the United States and Britain really in, well, over a century or even more. I mean, in continental Europe, they've had many currency collapses. And we, especially of the currency that's supposed to be the major reserve currency, that's unheard of, seeing a fiat currency collapse, because major reserve currencies have usually been as good as gold. So I think we're in for some interesting times ahead still. And with that, I'm going to wish you all a very good weekend. Take care. Bye.